Thank you, everybody, for coming. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. First of all, no food in here, only water. You can have coffee outside. Secondly, the emergency exits right here behind us and in the hall, and the restrooms are down the hall. So we thank you for coming. We're going to have a full day with a lot of discussion about two really important issues. The first issue is whether or not we should move closer to submitting a bid on the Olympics. And then this afternoon, we're going to have a really exciting panel at 1 o'clock about parks and open space, which the parks group from INC has been working on for quite a while. Larry and I have been on the Sharing the Gold Advisory Committee that the Exploratory Committee put together. And so we thought it would be a really good idea to bring both schools of thought to a public forum, which is why we decided to ask INC to host this. And because we were involved in the Sharing the Gold, we thought it would be better to have an outside moderator. So I am going to, first let me read the rules, some meeting guidelines, so we all are on the same page. I have a little half-sheet handout, which I'm sure everybody picked up. But when we get to questions, I'm going to be pretty strict. When we get to questions from the audience, they have to be 1 minute. You may either write them out and give them to Larry or myself, or you may speak them, but please write them out so you're ready and we can use all our time on hearing from our panel. So for suggested meeting guidelines, this is a public discussion, not a real, killer debate. We want to open it up, but we have to be respectful. There are probably as many opinions in this room as there are people, so we are going to hear from everybody. All voices should be heard. One person speaks at a time. Listen and respect all points of view, and we're going to be tough on the issues, but not on the people who have agreed to come here and be our guests. We have 6 guests who are not members of INC, and we want to show them what an INC forum looks like. When you do get to the question and answers, remember to just state your name briefly, where you live, and we don't want 1 or 2 people to dominate. We don't want somebody going on and explaining for 5 minutes their background on this issue. We want a sharp question, 60 seconds. Okay, those are the guidelines. Now let me introduce everybody. Whoops, we're missing somebody. First of all, our moderator for today is going to be Lisa Calderon, who many of you know is... Lisa is really good at moderating discussions. She's a professor at UCD, and she's also the co-chair of the Colorado Latino Forum. And we're really looking forward to her moderating. Then we have 2 panels. The panel that Visit Denver and the Exploratory Committee has put together today includes Rob Cohen, who's the head of IMA Financial, and he's also the chief of the Exploratory Committee. Is that the word? Chief? Chair, sorry, close. So he's been running this exploratory outreach process for about 2 months now, and I'm sure it's taken a lot of his volunteer time. We appreciate that. Thank you. Next we have Steve McConahey, who is the chair of SGM Capital and also on the Exploratory Committee, and his particular assignment on the Exploratory Committee is to work on the financing for an Olympics bid if we were to go forward. And lastly, on the Exploratory Committee, we have Jerome Davis, who I believe is a regional manager at Excel, but also serves on the Exploratory Committee and is in charge, a co-chair of the Games Operations Subcommittee. All the details, like finding venues, all that work. So. And just in time, introduce what we're calling the skeptics side of this discussion. We have former Governor Dick Lamm, who has who needs no introduction. And straight in from Boston, we have Chris Dempsey, who is the organizer of a movement in Boston called No Boston Olympics, which was successful in pushing back a bid in that city. And lastly, we have Kyle Zeppelin, who many of you know. He's the president of Zeppelin Places, which is a development firm that's focused on innovative development in downtown Denver. So, thank you all for coming today, especially our moderator, who's going to have her hands full here, but we would like to start. We're going to start, just in case you didn't read this, we're going to have a 15-minute introductory presentation by the exploratory committee, which will include a PowerPoint. Then we're going to have a 15-minute introduction by the other side, and then Lisa will take over with questions and answers. So thank you again for coming. Okay.
Oh, you just want me to go? Yeah. All right.
Ian.
Here you go. Is that better? Ooh. Do I need to do anything with that sound? All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting us to be a part of this discussion. Christine, I don't know where you ran off to, but I appreciate your introductory comments and talking more that this is about a civil dialogue and a discussion as opposed to a debate. And that's really the spirit under which we came. I just want to remind everyone, we're an exploratory committee. And so the job that we have is to try to understand if the United States Olympic Committee asks for bids from U.S. cities for a Winter Games, does Denver want to participate in that process? And we haven't made a decision, nor has the United States Olympic Committee yet asked for actual bids from any city. And so that's the process that we're under. And so I appreciate the comments about this not being a debate. When we saw a debate, we weren't sure if we don't know what we're for, how does people know what they're against? Really what we want to do is finish the process so that everybody can see that, and then we can have the appropriate debate and discussion. And so what we really want to do today is share about our process. We want to share some information that we think our community needs to know and needs to understand as they look at the discussion. And we want to listen and learn and understand the concerns that the community as a whole has. And we've been reading and listening and trying to understand the concerns that the community has. And we're hearing you. We hear that there's concerns about the financial performance of Olympic Games and the burden that it puts on communities and how they deal with that and what that means to their communities long term. We've heard concerns about venues and infrastructure that's built for the Olympic Games, and then after the Olympic Games, the community realizes that they're not sustainable in terms of long-term infrastructure needs or venues that need to be funded, and they become white elephants and financial burdens on those communities. We've heard the concerns about economic performance of the Games. Do they deliver on tourism? Do they deliver on economic growth that sometimes people think are part of the Games and that maybe they don't? And we've heard the concerns about social issues. And do the Games deliver on social issues and deliver them in new ways? These are concerns that we have heard. I'm sure we'll hear more today. And these are the tough questions and the kinds of things that the Exploratory Committee is trying to deal with in our process. What we also do know is that the Olympic Games, like any organization, is not perfect. It has flaws. And that goes up and down over time. And so if we look back in the 1970s and 80s, this is not the first time the Olympic Games have dealt with some of the issues they're dealing with now. In the 1970s, the number of bid cities were dropping. The cost of the Games were escalating. In fact, Montreal put on the Games in 1976, the same year that Denver would have, and they had to fund it with 30 years of bonds that took them 30 years to pay off for their community. And there were environmental issues in the 70s and 80s that people had concerns about the games. Governor Lamm, who was not the governor then, and the communities and citizens of Colorado rightly recognized those issues that were a part of the games. And their issue and the way that they went about it was to run a referendum to vote down the games and give them back to the IOC. A few years later, Los Angeles looked at those same set of circumstances and situations, and they asked themselves, is this an opportunity? Is this an opportunity for us to do the games in a new model, to do them our way, to do them the way Los Angeles wants to do them, to create a different financial model, to go out and find sponsorship dollars and TV revenue to fund the games, which up to that point have never been part of the funding of the games? And could they use existing venues as opposed to new venues to do the games? Now, we can debate probably all day whether those games were right or wrong. We could debate what's a part of the operations of the game and infrastructure that's built. But at the end of the day, those games delivered a $200 million surplus on the operations of the game and helped with many legacy issues that they had, both in Los Angeles and in the state. So what we're trying to do with the exploratory committee is not make a decision up front based on the old information that we have about the games, but ask ourselves the tough questions. Is this an opportunity for us as a community to do the games the Colorado way, to do them a different way? Can we do games that are inclusive and transparent? Can we do games based on regional cooperation, which has really built our city and our state in the way that we are? I think we do regional cooperation better than anybody. Not perfect, but I think we do it better than most. Can we use the games to deal with environmental issues and sustainability, not only in the way that the IOC wants it done, but can we actually take it to a higher standard, again, the Colorado way, and actually do it that way for our state, but maybe also create a legacy for the games on a go-forward basis that could do that. And then there's tough questions, like if you look at the games and you really track them, what you see is those people that are most affected by the games usually benefit the least. Can we do the games in a way that those that are most affected are benefited the most? These are tough questions, and they're all underlined based on, can we do the games in an economically feasible way? Can we fund the games without taxpayer dollars inside the operations of the games, which includes the temporary venues? And maybe more importantly and more difficult, can we respond to the guarantees by not requiring the city and taxpayer of the city and state to be the backstop for the cost of the games, but rather come up with another vehicle that is acceptable to the IOC so that they have comfort that we can deliver on the promises that we've made? These are not easy questions. These are difficult questions that we as an organization are trying to deal with and trying to answer. And we have a very short time frame to do that. We're going to try to answer many of them. We probably won't get them all answered before the end of our report. This is a long process that we need to go through, but this is the beginning of a dialogue. So what I wanted to do is just real quickly on process. We were formed in December of 2017. And so I know people think we've been at this a long time, but as an exploratory committee, that was really right before the holidays. We didn't have a ton of time. And so we created subcommittees. It didn't take us long to realize that we needed to have more people to help us with our work. So we created 5 subcommittees. The first 3, which you'll hear about here in a minute, really talk about the venues and the costs and the guarantee, and can we do them in a way that is economically feasible. The second ones get into our process and how we do our process and our community feedback. So we've created the community and civic engagement process. And I won't go through all of this, but let's just say we've been outreaching to. We had the Sharing the Gold here in Denver, where we had 64 participants, cross-section of our community to work on this. We had the Sharing the Gold also in the mountain communities. So we've had meetings in Idaho Springs and Georgetown and Dillon and Vail and Steamboat and Winter Park, etc., to get their input. We've been out talking to community groups. We've now talked to 40 groups reaching about 900 people to get your concerns and your thoughts. We had online community meetings. We had a survey, which I know got a lot of criticism. If you look at the front page, it was mostly positive things. A lot of people didn't click through, and we're tracking who didn't click through so we can respond and try to factor that into the report. But the second page was all negative comments, and the third page was a place where you could make open feedback. And that was designed by an independent third party. And then we have our website where we now have almost 20,000 people who have gone to it and unique visitors who have looked at it in new and different ways. So one piece about new things that we just want you to keep in mind as we have this discussion is the IOC recognizes the problems they've had. And they've looked at it. And in 2014, they started a process called Agenda 2020. And it's a document of about 40 initiatives that they wanted to do, 20 of which deal with either the bidding or the putting on the games. And very quickly, there's things in there about sustainability. There's things about lowering the cost of bidding. There's things in there about using existing and temporary venues as opposed to building new venues. Plugging into the legacy of a city. And maybe as important is for the first time in the 2026 process, the IOC is upfront saying that they're going to bring $925 to $950 million to the winning city to help them put on and host the games. Usually they've done that after the fact as opposed to upfront. And then they followed that up 4 years later with the new norm, which is 118 very ambitious reforms that they're saying is going to cut another $500 million cost out of the games. And I'll let Steve talk. Thank you. I'll let Steve talk a little bit more in a minute about finance. So since I'm getting the 5-minute warning, I will stop there, and I'm going to hand it off to my partners, Steve McConahey, who's going to talk about finance, and Jerome Davis, who's going to talk about games operation.
Thank you very much, and welcome. Thank you all for coming and showing your interest in this. We often hear about, well, how are you going to do this? How are you going to finance it? And I think Rob set up the context very well. These are different times from when these issues manifested themselves back in the 70s. And I'd like to at least set some of the context before we go into this slide. The first thing I want to say is the primary goal of our plan is to not require any subsidies or guarantees by the state or local governments. That's different. That's not been done before here in the United States, and certainly it hasn't been done elsewhere. We recognize that there will be some things that some government agencies will do, but we will contract for them to do that, whether it's street cleaning or garbage collection or extra police or whatever. We do that today when we have a Broncos game or something going on at the Pepsi Center. Also to recognize that from a security standpoint, which is a big issue, this is the highest priority security event that occurs in the United States. And as such, the federal government assumes the cost and direction of that security plan. So when you see budgets eventually down the road, when we finalize our plans, we will note that that security cost is covered by the federal government. The other thing I want to say is we've had some confusion about what it means when we privately fund a game. We're not issuing securities here. We're not providing dividends or return on investment. What we're simply saying privately means that we are not going to the government to to underwrite and guarantee these games. The other thing I would say, Rob's talked about it, that the $500 million savings and the $925 million contribution, we are in the process of working that through our budgets and see where that lays out. The other thing that we're doing is we are taking advantage of some new constructs, both in the venue side, where you can now do temporary construction and take it down and send it somewhere else. The big stadium in Korea, by the way, happened to be a temporary stadium. We're also taking advantage of some new insurance constructs, which when combined with corporate guarantees can fulfill the requirement of meeting the guarantee requirement of the IOC. And in their new guidelines, they have already indicated their willingness to negotiate and adapt that guarantee to the local communities. They made that public statement to Sion, Switzerland, which is considering a bid right now for the 26 games. So when the budget then proceeds down with all the ordinary, I shouldn't say ordinary, but traditional sources of revenue, ticketing, merchandising, sponsorships, and the like. And then, of course, we have on the expense side the typical expenses you have of running the games, including the cost of buying the insurance of a risk management plan that avoids having to have the state or local government step in and provide us any guarantees or subsidies. The last thing we're doing in our finance group is that we are looking at alternative ways in which the athlete housing can be financed. And as you will hear today, that's a potential legacy left behind for meeting low-income housing and employee housing, both here in Denver and up in the I-70 corridor. And the last thing I would just say, as you look at this budget, you can see the components that are in it. I think I've touched on most of them, but this is something that we have built up knowing historical numbers from all the previous North American games. We are also getting a third-party verifier to look at our budget and tell us whether we're right or wrong on some numbers. Keep in mind, these are all estimates based on what could happen out a few years. But when all is said and done, we think we'll have a sound budget that can deliver a surplus, and it can also fund a legacy fund, which will provide funds for this community to distribute as it will see fit to support youth programs or whatever. In the case of Salt Lake, they were able to create a fund of upwards of $90 million to this effect. So the reality is these games can be run in a financially sound way. The winter games are dramatically different than the summer games. And when you hear from Jerome, you will realize that we do not have to build so much of what has caused other cities to have cost overruns in history. So with that, I will stop and we'll open it up to more questions later on and turn it over to Jerome.
And actually, your side is out of time. However, I will come back to you, Jerome, when we start off on the discussion. Okay, we're going to do a 15-minute start. Oh, yours is on mute. Here you go.
I'm going to be very brief and yield my time to Chris Dempsey. It seems to me that the same issues that were there in 1972 are still here with us. On top of those issues, we have all of a sudden a new issue is, will there be snow? We've had 17 out of the 18 years, hottest years since 1972 in sort of global history. Well, not since global history, but in the last 1,000 years. And so, you know, that's an additional risk factor as you're weighing all of these things, along with the questions of security. I think these are well-meaning people. They are substantial people. I've seen them in action and a whole bunch of other civic engagements, but the Olympics is not right for Colorado.
Thank you, Governor. Governor, it's really an honor to be on a panel with you, because when we were in Boston, we looked to what Denver did in the early 70s as an example for U.S. cities and citizens in U.S. cities really standing up to the IOC. So it's great to be with you today, and we're fortunate, and Colorado is fortunate to still have you here talking about these same issues. So I'm Chris Dempsey, I'm from Boston, and I want to be very clear that it is not for a Bostonian to tell you whether the games are right for Denver. That is up for Denver to decide, and not for me to decide. But I do want to share what happened in Boston, what we learned, what we saw, and then the similarities that I'm seeing in Denver compared with what we saw in Boston. So thank you for the invitation to be here today. It really is an honor to be with you and to have an opportunity to share Boston's story a little bit. Some of these similarities between Boston and Denver. We've got the last two AFC Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. We both hosted Democratic national conventions that featured Barack Obama. 2004 when he made his big speech in Boston, and of course 2008 here in Denver, where he really took over from there. I mean, what an amazing event that was. We're also both known for our oysters. Ours come from Massachusetts Bay. Yours are the Rocky Mountain variety, and I'm not going to have a debate today about which is better. But I will try those tonight if someone puts them in front of me. I haven't had them before. And we also have a history of thinking about Olympic bids, weighing the pros and cons, and understanding that they're not right for our communities. This was Denver in the early 70s. This is Boston in 2014. These are the three gentlemen that at one point were leading the Boston 2024 bid. Very smart, capable, accomplished, generous men. John Fish on the left, who was the bid's chair, he is consistently rated as the single most powerful person in Boston by Boston Magazine. He's also the owner of the largest construction company in Massachusetts. In the middle, a man who needs no introduction, Governor Romney, someone that we're all very familiar with. And on the right, Steve Pagliuca, one of Governor Romney's colleagues from Bain Capital. He now owns the Boston Celtics. But it wasn't just sort of rich old white men. It was also people like Meb Keflezighi, who won the Boston Marathon and is an Olympian for the United States. David Ortiz, one of my heroes, a man who brought us our first World Series championship in 86 years. And Larry Bird, of course, the Boston Celtic player who was also an Olympian. And I was 10 years old when when the Dream Team was playing in Barcelona, right? So people that were very, very popular in Boston. And I think you're seeing some of the same dynamic in Denver with sports heroes being appointed to the exploratory committee. And the boosters really produced a captivating bid. Here's downtown Boston with our gleaming skyline in the background, the Charles River on the left, the Boston Harbor on the right, this beautiful new stadium with fireworks going off. I mean, what a stirring view. Here is Boston Common, the oldest public park in the entire United States, with the beach volleyball facility, again, that gleaming skyline in the background, the golden dome of our State House, the beautiful park and the public gardens, and the river in the background. I mean, this is really captivating stuff. But what Bostonians realize is the same thing that the IOC actually knows, which is that bid books are the greatest fiction ever written. Bid books are about selling you an idea, about hopes and dreams and promises, and they meet very hard realities when they are exposed to the light of day and when the public is able to dig in on the details. And that's exactly what happened in Boston. Bostonians were supportive of the bid as the bid was being talked about, and when the USOC chose Boston over DC, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Support was in the high 50s, even in the 60s, and opposition was down in the 30s. So Bostonians were very open to the world coming to Boston. We welcome the world every September when students come to Harvard and MIT and Northeastern and Boston University and Suffolk and Emerson and the long list of schools that we have. So we're a very open city, but as we learned more about the bid, Bostonians liked it a lot less. So we dispelled some myths, and I'm going to dispel those same myths for you today. The first is that the Olympics are going to fix your city's infrastructure. The reality is the IOC does not contribute a dime to your infrastructure. And in fact, to make matters worse, they actually require that lanes on your major highways and streets in your city be dedicated just for their use during the Olympics. So you have to have a special Olympic pass. You can be an IOC member or a sponsor or an Olympic athlete, but if you're a regular citizen, you are not driving in those lanes. The second myth is that the Olympics will be an economic boon for your city. There is no evidence whatsoever that the Olympics leaves your city better off from an economics perspective. And that's even true often in the short term, because what happens in the short term is that the Olympics scare off the usual tourist and business activity that would happen in your city. Most businesses, when the city hosts the Olympics, shut down and just tell their workers not to come to work for 3 weeks. The third is that the Olympics are going to somehow inspire people to participate in sport, and a new generation of Coloradan athletes and children are going to become these great athletes now. There's no evidence that that's the case. In the UK, they've actually seen sport participation numbers drop since they hosted the Olympics in 2012. The other myth here is that the Olympics, when they're in the United States, are profitable. It's just those other countries that do the Olympics wrong, but the US does the Olympics right. We can debunk every single one of those recent Olympics, starting with Lake Placid in 1980, where the city of Lake Placid required a bailout from the state taxpayers of New York to stave off bankruptcy. All you have to do is Google that. Google New York Times, Lake Placid 1981 deficit, and that article will come up. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these other bids in later slides. The next myth is that some games actually can be well managed, that you only hear about the Sochis and the Beijings, and that other bids really work out pretty well. The University of Oxford studied this. They found that 100% of the games since 1960 have gone over budget. They found that it was the riskiest type of mega project that a region could undertake. Riskier than a nuclear power plant, riskier than building a hydroelectric dam, riskier than building a subway tunnel. Incredibly risky projects. The next is that the IOC has somehow changed and that they're different now. And you heard Rob talk about Agenda 2020. I am not sure where he's getting his numbers. I've read that document 5 or 6 times. It is not 20 items in the list of 40, it's exactly 7 items. And I'm happy to go through the list with him and we can compare notes on this. One of the items to talk about cost savings is that instead of having to physically deliver copies of your bid to the IOC headquarters in Switzerland, you can now email it in. That's a savings of maybe a couple $100 on FedEx, on a bid process that easily goes above $50 million when all is said and done. The next is that the IOC has the best interests of cities at heart. They really want to do what's right for the host city. They talk about this as a competition, that the best city is going to win. In fact, the reality is that they are hosting an auction, and they want as many bidders in that room as possible. That's why they call it a bid. And as they get those bidders in the room, they are going to bid up that price so that it's in the interests of the IOC, not in the interests of the host city. Part of what Denver is being used as now is a talking point so that the IOC can say Denver is interested, Calgary is interested, Innsbruck is interested. They want to get that activity going so that those cities show up in the auction room and they get sucked into that auction process and they overbid. Here's what happened in the 2022 Winter Olympics bidding cycle. You had all these cities that were in the auction room, and then the ones on the right wisened up and realized that they were in an auction, not in a competition, and that this was not a good idea for them. So Stockholm, Oslo, Krakow, Munich, Davos, and Lviv, for one reason or another, including a couple referendums, including city council votes, all dropped out, leaving just Beijing, China, and almighty Kazakhstan to stay in the race. What's the common denominator between these? The two on the left are dictatorships with no democracy. Every single country on the right is a democracy, okay? So when democracies engage in these Olympic processes, they realize that they are getting a really raw deal, and they say this is not in our interest. The 8th is that there's going to be some sort of insurance package that is going to cover taxpayers from cost overruns. Don't worry about the fact that we might have budget overruns and bigger costs than we expected. Insurance is going to pick that up. It's exactly what Boston 2024 said. It's exactly what Chicago 2016 said. This myth was debunked by a Boston College professor who called it smoke and mirrors. A senior insurance executive said that it does not exist. In Chicago 2016's case, the leader of that bidding process was the founder of Aon Insurance, one of the largest insurance companies in the entire country, in the entire world, and even he was not able to create an insurance package that covered Chicago taxpayers from the risk. And I'd be glad to engage more on this question of insurance later on and whether there is such a thing as cost overrun insurance. It does not exist, folks. The 9th is that there's going to be some clear distinction between the public budgets and the private budgets. In fact, what's happening here is a shell game, and we'll get into this in more detail as we talk about the conversation, but there's really 4 budgets that you're talking about with the Olympics. There's the operating budget, which is the one on the far left here. Oh, is it advancing automatically now? There we go. Then you've got the non-OCOG permanent venues, then you've got public capital expenditures, and then you've got security costs. The 2 on the right are pure public dollars. Number 2 is kind of a mix between public and private. Number 1, they say, is private, but it's backed up by a taxpayer guarantee. So if there are cost overruns in bucket 1, the taxpayer picks them up. And the other thing that happens here is that costs that were originally in the private operating budget gets shifted over to the other budgets. That happened in Boston. The first budget they showed us, there was a $300 million line item for transportation in the operating budget. The next version of the budget 6 months later, that $300 million line item had just been moved into security. And they said, well, you know, that we're going to be transporting important people and VIPs, and those people need to be secure, so it's totally appropriate for federal taxpayers to pick that up. That's the game that gets played with these budgets. And then finally, and this is most important, it is a complete myth that the IOC is going to accept anything other than a taxpayer guarantee. They talked about the $950 million that the IOC hands you. That is one of the checks that does trade hands. It's true. We'll give the IOC some credit for that. The other check is the check that you all write back to the IOC, and that is a blank check. And it says that Colorado and Denver taxpayers are going to pick up the bill if there are cost overruns. We talked with Boston 2024 about this issue at length, and they admitted to us the IOC would never go for a city or for a deal that did not have the taxpayer guarantee. In Chicago 2016, Mayor Daley, for months, told his citizens at home, I'm not going to sign the guarantee. When he actually went to sign the final bid document in Switzerland, the IOC said, this is your last chance, you need to do this or your bid is not going to be valid. And he signed the document, flew home sheepishly, and admitted to his voters that despite months of promises of not signing that document, he signed it because it was the only thing that the IOC was going to accept. Let me hand it over to Kyle for 1 minute on, or 2 minutes, whatever's remaining, to share his thoughts, and I look forward to more conversation with you, but thank you so much for having me here.
Not much I can say to complement that, but this is really the conversation that we should have been having all along with the exploratory committee. You basically have a committee that's stacked with people it looks like to get to a presumed outcome, which is to put the bid in a form that's most likely to be accepted to still plausibly work for the community. Welcome the opportunity to talk about the issues today. It's unfortunate that we've gotten to this stage, later stage of the process where you've almost wrapped up your process. It goes into a bid, and then we're getting potentially promises for future considerations, which I think the community is pretty skeptical of at this point, from a group of people that are highly invested in one outcome. So I look forward to talking through all these issues.
Test. It's on? Great. All right, so we are going to go through some rapid fire questions. We're going to take another about 15 minutes and then we're going to open it up for you all. So let's get right to it. And we're going to start with Mr. Davis. So I'm actually combining a couple of questions here for you. I'd like you to talk about these temporary and permanent venues, and specifically around looking at issues of displacement, and also whether this committee has looked at racial impact statements. So when there's going to be a major project, there's often an environmental impact statement to see the impact on the surrounding environment. So can you speak in that context on these temporary and permanent venues? So what are they, first of all, and then what would be the impact resulting?
So thanks, Lisa. Is this still on? Thank you for the question. Again, my name is Jerome Davis, and so I would probably start off in saying that following Chris's presentation, I'm probably neither the most popular or powerful guy, whether on this committee or in this city. So I doubt having my name on the committee was designed to move the needle to make this thing work. So I'm just here being a servant leader, working on a committee really designed to see if what we're looking at is good for Colorado. And that's pretty much it. As it relates to some of the questions, I think one of them had to do with sort of racial impact studies. I appreciate this question, and I would probably tell you that what we first have to do is address as we're going through this process, is this something that's good for Colorado? And then I think once we maybe get to that answer, if it is something good for Colorado, then I think we begin to talk about what are some of the possible subsets that we also have to address within this exploratory process. I think another one of your questions were some of the environmental impacts, and it is a serious question that we certainly have to address. Certainly I'm a native here in Colorado, probably many of you are. I grew up here just a mile away off of 32nd and Holly. And so when we look at this beautiful state and what it provides us and all the various gems that we have here, we do have to address, will we have impacts as it relates to some of these issues? So those environmental impacts, certainly reviews will certainly come once we have that opportunity to look at the specific venues. But where we are right now is just trying to keep options available about where we will be. Once we sort of narrow that down, that process will certainly continue on.
So there's no specifics about any of that quite yet. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay. So let me go to Mr. Dempsey. Research shows that city after city seeking to host the Olympics has promised incalculable benefits, and you touched upon this a little, and that there will be a little to no cost to communities in terms of taxes. What do you say to the Olympic Exploratory Committee's promise here in Colorado that things will be different and that taxpayers won't be guaranteeing this enterprise? Is this possible? If not, why not?
Yeah, so that's the same conversation that played out in Boston and really has played out in every recent Olympic host city. I think I have a slide on this actually, which is, we call this the boosters dilemma. And what that means is that the boosters are really caught between what the IOC wants and what the host city actually wants and needs. So the boosters are going to promise openness and transparency, and the IOC actually requires that a lot of the documents be kept secret, and they tell your city, well, you can't reveal them to the public because you're in a competitive situation and you wouldn't want your competitors to know what you're doing. The host city, you as citizens, you clearly don't want to sign that taxpayer guarantee, but the IOC requires it. You don't want to turn your city over to a 3-week event. You want a long-term legacy. That's why you hear this word legacy a lot. But the IOC, their most important criteria is an event that looks good on television. Their biggest funder is NBC. Their second biggest funder are additional television stations around the world. The Olympics are a television event. It's about putting on an excellent show. If you remember that photo or that image I showed of Boston Common with the beach volleyball center, the IOC loved that. It's part of the reason the USOC chose Boston is that beautiful view of Boston Common with the trees and downtown. Building that beach volleyball center would have required cutting down 50 trees on Boston Common. When the public found out about that, they were furious, but the USOC loved it because it meant that the venue could be right downtown, close to their 4 or 5-star hotels, and have that great drone or helicopter shot looking down on our beautiful city. Do you want 50 trees cut down to do that, to host a 3-week television show? Is that what your priority is? That's where the boosters get caught, and that's why every bid goes over budget. They promise you the costs are going to be low. At the same time, they promise the IOC extravagance.
Thank you. And we know a little bit about cutting down trees in public spaces. Mr. Cohen, what is your response to studies that indicate there is little to no evidence that hosting the games increases tourism or boosts long-term economic growth? And some of the things we've heard is the example of Los Angeles, which we've also heard is an outlier. And with that, if other cities, not just within the U.S., but globally, have backed out of the games, why should we be pursuing it so strongly?
Yeah, no, great questions. Thank you for those. First of all, we haven't made public comments that say we're doing this because we think there's long-term boost in tourism or economic benefit. Are there short-term boosts? Sure. I mean, there are people that will come here for the games, and that will obviously help us from a non-local tax-based revenue, but no different than conferences and other things that we put on in our city. So we've never made that boast that that's the reason that we're doing this. I feel like there's a ton of things that I need to respond to. I too have read the Agenda 2020. I've read it multiple times. I don't know if Chris is talking about just things related to games operation or games and bidding process, but I've gone through it and I've identified 20 issues that I think have an impact on bidding and operations of the game. And as we all know, smart, intellectual people can read similar documents and disagree and work through it, and that's the beauty of a democracy process. As far as transparency and the way games get done, the reason Los Angeles was successful is they dared to be different. They dared to stand up and say, I'm not going to get caught up in an auction. I'm going to do it in a way that's unique. Now, yes, they had an unusual situation because at the time they were the only bidder, right? And,
It's quite an auction. When you show up and you're the only bidder, you get a really good deal.
right. But what I will say is that the IOC, for instance, has said that they're open to talking about the guarantees. This isn't me making this up. This is a public statement that they made to Sion. They just recently made a statement that they would look at a limited guarantee as opposed to a full guarantee. And just because the IOC says it doesn't mean that we have to accept it. What we're trying to do as an exploratory committee is say, if we were to do the games for Colorado, how would we do the games in Colorado? Put forth what we think makes sense, and if it can be accepted, great. If not, the games can go somewhere else and be done. You don't have to sell yourself to the IOC. And what I want to say is, do I love sport, and do I think that this could be something that changes our community? I do. But I love Colorado more. I've lived here 31 years. I'm just like most of you. I don't want to screw up our city any more than anybody else, and I know nobody on the exploratory committee wants to do that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
You're welcome.
And I just want to remind folks to speak directly into the mic, and I know we're having a little bit of feedback. To Governor Lamm, I'd like you to talk a little bit about when the Olympics came before. The question came before when under your tenure, and also if this does go to a vote for the people, as was announced yesterday in a press conference of exploring that option. We anticipate that the Olympics Committee will have far more to invest in election campaigning than the No Olympics Committee announced at yesterday's press conference. Do you think we could have a fair election on this issue?
I mean, in inverse order, I do think we can have a fair election because I think there are certain issues that are so visible that I think that the public gets all of the necessary information. It's not ideal, but I think that I would be more than willing to run the campaign on a grassroots basis. In 1972, I was chairman of the audit committee in the legislature, and that's when I started looking at these figures. And I don't want to hold these people over here responsible for the 1972 organizing committee. That really was a gang that couldn't shoot straight. And that Rocky Mountain News was a courageous newspaper who followed up on all of their claims and found that it was just, filled with hot air. But the circumstances change, and I think that this ought to be argued on today's realities. However, having said that, you got to recognize what Chris just showed. There is a whole history of other places running negative balances, withdrawing their bids. We are climbing a very steep hill that other people have climbed only to find the rock to roll back on top of them. So I feel as a matter of cost benefit, I'm not about to deny that it can't be done. I'm just to suggest to you it's unlikely to be done in view of history.
All right, thank you. Mr. McConahey, I'm going to give the last question to you before we open it up to the audience. The bidding committee in Chicago's Olympic exploration spent more than $50 million in the preparation and submission of its bid for the 2016 Olympics. We know that Boston 2024 spent more than $15 million. What is the exploratory committee's estimate of the cost to prepare a bid, and how will that cost be covered?
Well, first off, there has been no specific procedure laid out by the United States Olympic Committee. They are, after all, the gatekeeper as to whether or not Denver or any other city in the United States would have a chance to bid. So we have not heard that they are planning yet to bid for 26. They publicly said they want to go for 30. So number one, we don't have a game plan as to what they're going to require. Should it happen for 26, it would be quite a short, quick process because the United States Olympic Committee would have to have its city selected by September of this year because that's when the 26 international competition starts. So you're looking at maybe 3 to 4 months max for you to be ready to submit your plan to the USOC. We don't think that's a very large expense because we think by the time we're done, we'll have enough information that we can present our plan in sufficient detail for them. Should you go to the international competition, that's a bigger stage, but it has been cut in half. It used to be a 2-year competition, it's now 1. And so while Boston and Chicago in particular, because they went all the way through the process, Boston didn't, you could expect a substantial reduction in the cost of their bid. We don't have the finals on that because, again, we don't even have the final procedure and the guideline requirements for what it would take. But whatever that number is, should we proceed, we will fund it through private contributions and donations.
Thank you. So now I'm going to open it up to the audience, and I think what I'll do, oh, good, great. So we have another mic that can travel around. Again, please keep your questions brief to a minute or less, and then please also let us know who you're directing your question to. So I'll do a combination of written and then people who want to ask their questions as well. Sure, if you want to line up, that would be great. So let's... You want to start with yours? Okay. All right, we're going to start with a written question for finance. And this is not, looks like directed to anyone in particular. Are you counting the billions of dollars that Denver residents have already spent on infrastructure in the Olympics, I-70 expansion? The loss of 261 trees in Historic City Park Golf Course for a drain. So I will address that to anyone on the Olympics Exploratory Committee.
Well, let me just say that if you look at our plan as it's evolving, as can be described in more detail, those projects specifically that you are talking about are not within our purview. We do not have any responsibility or authority over them. And so they are not in our budget. And in fact, one of the reasons that you've heard about all these cost overruns, if you look at the history of the cities who've had the big overruns, it's because they have put infrastructure development and other new venue costs into their budget. We don't have that in our budget. That's why we believe we can do this in a much more efficient way. But those particular projects you're talking about, we have not provided for them because they're not in our budget and they're not in our purview.
Okay, I'm going to give Kyle an opportunity to respond, and we'll do that for both questions on both sides.
People can't hear, and they're wondering if it's the microphone.
So they're saying people can't hear?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's...
So we could pass your microphone to them when it's your turn?
I think you need to just talk closer to the mic. That's really what it is.
Okay. Go ahead, Kyle.
So right now you have 4 major projects, all billion-dollar-plus projects. None of them involve affordable housing. They've all been implicated in the Olympics. So DIA shopping mall, secured entry, I-70 expansion through minority neighborhoods in Denver. That's the connection to National Western Center, and then the GO bond. The concern is that you're going to clear the path to further projects. There's nothing to stand in the way of tearing down Mile High Stadium. It's already been talked about behind the scenes. As far as turning that into a retractable dome, those public dollars don't count. Those aren't in the stack. How many of those other projects are there out there? I mean, you're saying you have 11 of the 13 venues, but we think that the few that you don't have are the most expensive ones, that this is an invitation to continue to spend billions on non-priorities. Everything in history says that, as far as the way it's currently being planned. I mean, the way the the ideal way to plan the Olympics is to come up with a big, broad vision for what we want the community to look like, which includes thousands of affordable units, includes transit, includes green infrastructure, package that up, hand it to the Olympic Committee. If that doesn't work, I guess we'll just focus on long-term investments in the future. The Olympic model seems like it's broken anyway. So that's the concern, is that these projects that have all been implicated in the Olympics have been outside the process. You don't feel like you need to answer for them, and you're recusing yourself, but this is just an invitation to continue business as usual and kind of accelerate the process.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. Let's go to the question in the audience.
Hi, my name's Judy Weil-Oxner. I'm a Colorado native, so that's my perspective. I remember the 70s well. This question is for Mr. McConahey. You opened by saying that these are different times than the 70s. My question is, did you support the Olympic bid in the 70s? And also, are we imagining that temporary venues, so-called temporary venues, would not have a lasting environmental impact?
Am I on? Hold it closer.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. I did not vote one way or the other in 1972 because I wasn't here until 1977, even though I knew the governor before I moved out here. So that's the answer to your first question. The answer to the second question is temporary facilities can be built and they can be salvaged. And for example, you can build a ski jump like an erector set and pick it up and move it somewhere else where perhaps, like a Steamboat Springs, for example, who's had long-standing heritage in ski jumping, needs a ski jump. If that was built on a temporary basis, you could contribute that as a legacy issue. So the bottom line is these are new technologies. They can be built. And as I said, in Korea, the main stadium was actually a temporary stadium that will be taken down and reused.
Chris?
I just wanted to answer part of that, because I think sometimes when people hear temporary venues, they think we're talking about building a venue and then tearing it down and putting it in the dump. Or whatever it is we're doing. We're actually talking about doing what Steve just talked about. And this very weekend in Vail, there is a snowboard U.S. championship that is happening. They built basically the venue for all of snowboarding that has existed, the same aspect as the Olympic Games. The 50 top athletes are here, and there are temporary stands out there that they are using for those games. And so it can be done in a feasible and environmentally friendly way, and we do it all the time in this state, all the time at many of these venues, and do them for the benefit of our community and our people who live here.
So they've brought up the Korean Olympic Stadium a few times. That stadium was built at a cost of $109 million, and it's being used for exactly 11 hours and then torn down. Average cost of about $10 million per hour. So these are enormously expensive facilities, even if they're temporary. The reason that they make it temporary in the case of the Korean one is that the stadium would essentially sit everyone that lives in that province in Korea. They built it in the middle of nowhere, and they don't want it to be a white elephant, and so they're going to take the time to tear it down. But they built a full-service stadium to use for 11 hours. Just on this topic of the IOC changing, another note on that. So Rob talks a lot about Agenda 2020 as really the sign that the IOC has reformed. But my understanding is that Rob also supported the 2011 Denver Olympic bid, which was before Agenda 2020, as well as the 2008 Denver Olympic Exploratory Committee and Potential Bid, which was before Agenda 2020. So it seems like there's a disconnect there where he's saying it's the new IOC, but he also supported the old IOC. And then just one more point on this. This is nothing new from the IOC that they support temporary facilities. They had a challenging bidding cycle in the late 90s that led to the 2002 Games Study Commission, where Dick Pound, who you saw earlier, actually chaired that. And they said in that document that they are going to insist on sustainability and temporary facilities and low-cost games. The games that followed that they chose, that the IOC chose after that commission study, included Beijing 2008, London 2012, which was more than 2 times over budget. Sochi 2014, which was $50 billion. So they have said as a marketing ploy that they've reformed in the past, and the actual choices they have made have had no consistency with their language about sustainability, about temporary facilities, and about low costs.
Okay. Let's take another question from the audience.
Thank you. My name is Jim Goddard. I'm Executive Director of Senior Housing Options. We provide low-income housing and assisted living to elders as well as people with disabilities. And what I wanted to address was the legacy of affordable housing. I realize that's been a discussion within the group for quite a while. I, by the way, am supportive of an Olympic bid, but I wanted to go beyond where, although I do have a question for Jerome and perhaps for Rob as well, about the legacy of affordable housing. There have been several Olympics, including Atlanta, Vancouver, even Turin, Italy, who have had a legacy of the use of affordable housing for the extended use of Olympic Village, as well as a media village. Now, a lot of people have said, well, that's way back, that's going to be way forward in 2030. But frankly, the process for getting affordable housing takes many years to do. So I speak from experience of that, looking at a program that we hope to have in Longmont. My question is, during this process, the Exploratory Committee has created a really rich discussion about this. And given the possibilities of what an Olympic Village could do, I want to talk about both the legacy of the creative ideas that have come up about affordable housing for an Olympic Village, but also what could be the legacy of this Exploratory Committee and this bid process for solving solution or finding solutions for affordable housing.
Okay, Jerome or Rob, do you want to take that since it was directed toward you all?
Sure. I mean, you know, I've said it a number of times. We as a, closer, I'm sorry. I've said it many times. What we're trying to do is look at the budget of the games and say, can we put on the 17-day event of the games inside the operations of the budget? It should not be our sole responsibility, nor the responsibility of the Olympic Exploratory Committee to deal with the long-term issues that our community is facing. It should be all of our responsibilities to deal with that. Ours included, theirs included. We have an affordable housing issue in our community, and we need to deal with it. We don't need to deal with it necessarily in 2030. We need to start dealing with it now and all the way up to 2030. All we're saying is, can the Olympic Games and the discussion of it be a catalyst to bring the issues up? I would like to say that it already has. The fact that we're talking about it as a part of this Olympic process is bringing it to the forefront of our discussion and is helping lots of people who maybe don't understand how important this issue is to make it more important for our community overall. The Olympic Games are not the panacea. They're not going to solve all social issues that we have. But can they help be a catalyst to get to the discussion, to do it for issues that we have to solve, whether we bring the games here or not? We need to deal with affordable housing now and for our everyday citizens that live here to make our community better and to make it what we want it to be.
Kyle, do you have a response?
Yeah, I mean, I think this shows in a lot of ways just how out of touch the committee is from everything that I've heard, which is that dorm room style units that don't deliver for 12 years and maybe 500 of them that could include kitchens are going to work with urban families that are currently being priced out of the city. Those families need ownership opportunities. They need different kinds of living spaces that would never be addressed with that. We need, you know, the accumulated community needs are, you know, it's 50,000 units 2 or 3 years ago, and they're sitting there with National Western that's been heavily implicated in the Olympics. Virtually no provision for affordable housing. There's hundreds of acres that could get deed restricted. They could start the process of turning into affordable housing tomorrow. I'm not seeing anyone that's part of that project that's been particularly visionary on affordable housing or transit or any of these issues. It's really an afterthought, and all the indications are from the tangible steps that have been made that it's going to continue to be an afterthought. I think they'll dangle something over a very desperate community and offer some scraps that are a tiny fraction of the budget to try and check it off the list, but very little confidence this is about affordable housing or addressing real community needs.
Okay. Question from the audience.
My name is Bonita Leahy, and I want to start with some facts. This is from the Climate and Atmospheric Science Report, 2018. This is touching on something Governor Lamm said. Across the western U.S. in the last 50 years, there's been an average decline of 15 to 30%, or 25 to 50 kilometers in volume of snow, which is equivalent to the largest man-made lake in the U.S., which is Lake Mead. So my question is, A, if you're going to go forward, have you put in the expenses to make artificial snow, because we're not going to have it, and B, where are you going to get the water, because that's our most precious resource.
And are you directing that question to anyone in particular? Who would like to answer that question?
Well, thanks for the question. Again, as we're in this process of exploring if we should go forward with this, there are a lot of issues in there that are very important. And as you talk about, one of them being climate change, whether it relates to water or other things, certainly are important from a sustainability standpoint for us to understand. In this process we're reviewing, there are a lot of activities that are going on right now that are moving our state forward in terms of addressing some of this stuff. The process of where we are right now won't address everything. Very similar to what Rob said. I'm struck a little bit by the fact that it seems to be that my involvement on this Olympic Exploratory Committee means that affordable housing is not important to me. I live here too, or that transportation or congestion is not important to me. I understand that. I understand.
Go ahead, Jerome.
But what I'm just, I understand.
Speak a little louder.
But what I'm just saying is we are looking at addressing all of those issues. We don't have all of the answers right now.
Okay. Does anyone on this side want to respond?
Could I just
go ahead.
Just to the question, every one of the snow venues that we are looking at right now, with the exception perhaps of Nordic, already has snowmaking equipment. And so in terms of the expense of that and the readiness and preparedness of those facilities to do alpine or snowboarding is already in place. The water is a separate issue, but I just want you to know that infrastructure is already in place.
Okay, so we're going to keep
it's in
moving.
our budget.
I'm sorry, it's in the budget. Okay. All right, so we're going to keep on moving.
My name is Jack Sleemers. I live on the Front Range here. I've been in Colorado for 82 years. I've seen snowfall and I've seen no snowfall. This year we've had 2 storms, 8 inches each. I don't think snowmaking equipment is a substitute for snowfall. It's only a supplement to that. I believe in climate change. I don't believe that it's a hoax. But if we get the 2030 Olympics and we don't have enough snow, what happens to the environment then? What happens to the contestants and their families? What happens to the investors? What happens to the taxpayer? And what happens forever to the Winter Olympics?
Go ahead, Chris.
So I'll take this one because they got the last one on water. I think it's an important issue. You know, you hear the IOC and you hear the Exploratory Committee talk a lot about sustainability. Let's go back to that 2022 auction when the IOC was left with just Beijing, China, and Almaty, Kazakhstan. Almaty actually has snow, Beijing does not, but the IOC chose Beijing because they were going to be too embarrassed to host the Olympics in Kazakhstan. And so the Beijing is undergoing a huge water diversion project to provide water to the base of the mountains so that they can do snowmaking on mountains that don't have snow. And the farmers in that area in northern China are going to basically go without water for months at a time to support the snowmaking north of Beijing. But of course, again, because China is not a democracy, they don't really have a say, and they're just sort of stuck with that. And fortunately, we have a thriving democracy and a debate, and I think that question of water and usage is a really important issue. It's one that the IOC really has not shown any commitment to whatsoever in terms of real sustainability.
Rob, do you have a response?
Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but a lot of these things are issues that are bigger than an Olympic bid. We need to solve water in our state, again, for the people who live here every day and for us as communities. We have a big portion of our economic infrastructure is built around tourism and skiing. And so whether we have the Olympic Games or not, we have to come up with creative new solutions. I too believe in global warming. We have to come up with new solutions. We have to figure out how to deal with it and balance it between farmers and our ski resorts and our everyday lives that we have here. And I think it's unfair to say that because we want to bring the Olympics here or look at that we don't believe in that issue or that issue is important. And the last couple of games that have been on, I'm not saying whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, or whether they went to Beijing or whatever. I think this is why the IOC is saying they want to come back to more traditional sites like Europe and North America, which I think gives us some negotiating room with them, again, to do the games the Colorado way. But the last couple of games have needed to make snow to do it, whether it's Sochi, Vancouver. I mean, if you go down the list, they've used snowmaking. Even if there's a heavy windfall or snowfall in a year, the way the IAFs work on games is they want the snow to be a certain consistency, and there will be an element of man-made snow as well as natural snow as a part of that to host the competition.
Okay, before I take another question from the audience, I want to get to some of these written questions, and I'm going to try to lump them in like categories. They're mostly for the exploratory committee. So for you all, this Olympic committee acts like it's official. When was this committee started? Who started it? And what do these people have to gain? And then just attached to that, how much in public funds has been spent so far on this process?
Okay, so great questions. I've already said the formal part of the exploratory committee started in December 2017. Chris accuses me of being in favor of the Olympics in 2012 and 8. I was part of the exploratory committee. We never finished our process because the USOC said that they were going to move forward with the 2024 bid. So yes, I was part of the process, and I've been looking at this issue with groups that have looked at that. The beauty of that is it's not just a 3-month process. We can go back and look at all the work that committee did and committees before that. I think you guys know as a community, we bid on the games in 1932. Colorado Springs and Aspen bid on the games in 1956. We bid on the games in 76, won them and gave them back. We bid again in 1998 and lost to Salt Lake, who lost to Nagano, and who did that. So this has been an ongoing issue of us looking at it, and we have all that history to build on. These are volunteers who are doing it. They're not getting paid. There are some paid consultants, et cetera, that are being paid for by Visit Denver, which is paying every day to look at bringing conferences here, tourism events here. That's what they do. They look at bringing events here, and so we're doing that. There is no direct taxpayer money in this. I just went to Korea to try to look at this for the benefit of our city. I paid it out of my personal pocket to go there and to look at that. I'm not going to put that on the taxpayer, and neither is anybody else on the exploratory committee.
And I want to see if Chris wants to respond. But before I do, I just want a question of clarification. So everyone on the committee is a volunteer, pretty much as you've said, except for some consultants. How were they chosen?
There was a selection process, so there was a bid that was sent out for consultants, and then they submitted proposals to those bids, and then they were selected.
They were selected by who?
There was the Civic and Community Engagement Subcommittee was formed with their co-chairs in the committee, and then they picked the consultants.
And the mayor and the governor appoints those people?
The mayor and the governor appointed the exploratory committee, but they have purposely chosen to recuse themselves from the process. They haven't attended any meeting. The mayor came to the first meeting, and we set up the exploratory subcommittee so that we could have a broader reach from what was originally given to us as the exploratory committee.
Okay, because I'm sure you all have heard the concern that the ones who are selected and appointed to serve on these committees kind of come with that perspective from the people who appointed them.
No, I appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons, and I know many people in this room don't know me, but I told both the mayor and governor, if we're going to do this process, it's going to be transparent, it's going to be inclusive, and it's going to be representative of our community. And that's why we formed these subcommittees beneath the committee to reach out to a broader perspective. That's why we've done these civic and community engagements. This isn't a show, as some people say. We're genuinely interested in the thoughts and concerns that people have. And I would just say, judge us on the final report, because the final report will be made public and transparent. And read our final report and see if the comments and concerns that you have are reflected in there and addressed. Are we going to make everybody happy? No, we won't make everybody happy. Democracy is a bloody, messy process, but it works, and I believe in it.
Okay, thank you. Chris, if you want to respond.
So what we saw in Boston is that the boosters said, give us a little bit more time, be patient, we're just exploring this, it's just a concept, it's just an idea. And then overnight, it became an official bid without any vote of the city council, any vote of the legislature, no formal citizen representation way. And if I were a taxpayer in Colorado, I'd be asking for a referendum. One reason why is because the IOC hates referendums, and they hate referendums because they keep losing them around the world. Rob mentioned Scion, Switzerland. The IOC has told Scion, oh, don't worry, maybe we'll let you do a sort of a modified taxpayer guarantee. The reason the IOC is whispering sweet nothings into their ear in Scion, Switzerland is because there's a referendum coming up in a few months, and the polling is showing that 60% of people are opposed. And so the IOC is desperate to say anything that they can to not lose yet another referendum in a democracy.
That's exactly what I was going to say. If this was a truly representative process, let's present all viewpoints, have actual community representation. You look at the exploratory committee, every major business interest is heavily represented on there. You have all the construction companies, all the lobbyists, all the hotel operators, everybody that stands to make a direct benefit, and then some boosters, some former athletes, some people that have committed, you included, years to realizing this Olympic dream. That's not representative of both sides. And then there's this seeming aversion to voting on it. And I think that's what we'd ask for is, one, open up the process, have it be fully representative, and at the end of it, let's hold a vote. And make a determination, and I think you know the answer to that. You've gotten feedback from your consultants. It's not polling well, it's not looking good, so what you're going to continue to do is subvert the process.
Can I respond
Yes.
quickly to that? Thank you. You say we haven't been inclusive. Well, the Sharing the Gold process, we reached out to a broad-based set of community people. Vivian Stovall is in the back of this room. She represents a lot of different points of view in this community. Rudy Gonzalez was a part of that. Black Girls Hike, the Asian Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber were a part of that. One Colorado, representing people of sexual orientations that are different than many. Those are important voices in our community. We've brought them into the process. We've also reached out to Governor Lamm and yourself, Kyle, and reached our hand across and said, if you guys have concerns about the process, don't necessarily take shots from outside. Come in the room and help us. How come you haven't accepted that? And open in dialogue. We all love this community. Let's come together and figure out how we work together to answer the questions. And guess what? If we can't, then we'll decide as a community to not move forward with the bid. But if we can, why should we miss out on that opportunity and that dialogue for us to work together? That didn't happen in Boston.
Are you going to decide as a community with a vote? Do you support a public vote later this year?
So I'm not sure if everybody heard the question. I'm going to ask folks to just, so we can move through it very quickly.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a very important question. So the question was, do we support a vote? I am the chair of the exploratory committee. I do not speak on behalf of the committee. What I can make a commitment to you in this room is Whether this community should vote on the games will be part of the discussion of the exploratory committee and will be in our final report. I've said it before, judge us on the report. Don't judge us on perceptions and thoughts that you have. Judge us on what we do and what we say in that report. And we will address the issue of a referendum in the state. One of the challenges we have, I don't have a problem with the democracy and people voting, is what would the referendum say and what are the implications of it on our democratic process? I'm not saying that that means we shouldn't have a vote. I'm just saying I think we need to think that through and work that through. And again, do that together as opposed to a single group. People who are worried and hiding behind their program worry about having a democratic process. We don't.
Okay. So thank you very much, Rob, for that. I would just add with that, the names that you put out there who are on the committee, great and wonderful. These also tend to be the names who get asked over and over again for a lot of these committees. So I would really encourage you to expand out, because Colorado Latino Forum, for example, wasn't asked to participate. So there's lots of other committees that usually don't get voice.
And I would
Go
ask
ahead.
the police submit those names because we'll take them and we'll include them in the process.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andra Zeppelin. I'm related to one of your panelists, and I have some insider information that you guys actually met and talk about this stuff. So thank you for reaching across the aisle. I'm excited that you're here to talk about this. But more than being related to Kyle, I am the mom of 2 girls who will be totally ripe for 2030 Olympics. These are kids who run down the slope screaming, "I am Lindsey Vonn." So I am super excited about the Olympics in 2030. But more than I'd like to have this in my backyard, I'd like to see my city get something from it. So you said something, Rob, that definitely got my attention. And it was, it's a combination. We learned that the IOC doesn't contribute economically to the Olympics. And you said, the short-term economic benefits are no different than hosting any other conference or event. And that was right after you said, we never said that we are in this for the long-term economic boost or the long-term tourism growth. So from an economic standpoint, what is your number one reason for wanting to have this in Colorado?
No, that's an excellent question. And so I've said it many times. This is a 17-day event, and it's a festival. I think it's part of our pride. I think the values of the Olympic movement are aligned with the values that I know of people in Colorado. You hear of cost overruns, you hear of those issues. But if you look up Olympism and you look up the Olympic Charter, it talks about men and women having equal rights. It talks about diversity and inclusion. Whether it's race, religion, sexual orientation, it talks about those things. It talks about a peace movement, laying down arms to come together. We just saw in the recent games with North Korea and South Korea marching together. These are values that if you ask Olympic athletes and Olympic people that sometimes get lost in the overall Olympic peace. I think they're aligned with the people who live and work in this state of Colorado. And I think one of the things we can do is showcase that to the world with the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter and all the things that are going on in our world. I can't think of anything more important right now than to share those kinds of values with the world and to do that. And I think if we can do it in an economically feasible way, that's even better.
So just for clarification, your number one reason is for the values to be showcased?
I think that we can we can show the world how to do an event in a fiscally way. We can help long-term social issues that we have in our community. Again, I've said it, not as the primary platform, but as a way to bring focus on those, and at the same time we can deliver values that I think make a difference.
And was Black Lives Matter invited to the table?
I don't know the answer to that because I wasn't part of it's a great question.
I just figured since you threw their name out there, I'm just wondering if they were involved.
I do not know the answer.
Great. Kyle, do you have a response?
So the part that's maybe missing from that Rob's talked about in front of other business groups is growth. And I think that's a significant motivating factor for a lot of these interests that are very intimately involved. The concern is that we're lighting a fire under the economy in some of the ways that it's already overheated. There's some very motivated business interests that want to be a part of it. Enough growth for those groups will never be enough, whether it's 20% year-over-year returns for the Kiewits, for the Ferrovials, for the major multinational companies that stand to build these things and the lobbyists that represent them. For the community, it's hard to know how a 60-year-old retiree in South Denver is getting the benefit of some of the things that Rob's talked about in his business of hyper-growth models. And I think there is, if you look at the composition of that exploratory committee, there's business interests, arguably crony business interests are very, very heavily represented.
Okay, question from the audience. Councilman Espinosa.
So Rafael Espinosa, Denver City Council, District 1, Northwest Denver. I represent 1/11 of the population of the city and county of Denver. But as you know, you met 3 months after you started your committee, Mr. Cohen, you met with me one day before, literally the day before you met with the community. And there are 0 representatives from my district on your committee. So on the issue of inclusivity, I take very much issue with that when 1/11 of the population doesn't have a single representative in that entire number. The other thing I stressed at that point in time was the importance of numbers, budgets, inflows, outflows, and expenses and assets, and how all this was going to work before you're ever going to see me get behind something like this. But the one number you keep throwing out is the $950 million gift from the IOC. And in your own budget slide, there isn't a single number in there. Yet you've talked about how we've done this, so we've been talking about this for a long time. Why don't we have numbers and when will we get numbers? So that's one question. The other question is how much, if you're also cautious about this unlimited paid, what the community would be on the hook for, and now have spoken about limited, the IOC is talking about a limited amount. So if unlimited is not kosher with you, how much is to put the public on the hook for? And to Mr. Cohen, these are big numbers, Mr. Dempsey, these are big numbers. So I would like to see if you have any sense about if this were, the only way this would be attractive for private enterprise to conduct it is if private enterprise wins. And obviously we know there's a lot of money going from the sponsorships and everything else that goes along with it, and the public investment, the IOC investment. So how much money do the winners will it really stand to make while the public ends up insuring these things? Thank you.
Yeah, well, let me start with the first question, the first part, and I'll let Steve answer it. First of all, yes, I did meet with you, and thank you very much for doing it. Sharing the gold is one part of our process, that committee process. We also offered every city council member and every group to hold a town hall meeting and to participate. That's another way for us to gain people and feedback. And so the invitation was made for people to have a place to give input and to do that. So I don't really think it's fair for you to say we didn't reach out to that part of the community. We have, as I put up on the slide, we have multiple ways we're trying to do this. And I've said it's not perfect and we don't have all the answers, but we are trying. And I said it, that didn't happen in Boston. They didn't do this community-wide civic engagement process. And so we've done that. We got 30 seconds. I have more I'd say, but I'll give it to Steve to talk about the budget.
Well, very quickly, we have said we do not want subsidies or guarantees. And if we can't, and we're not going to structure a budget that requires it, period. That's bottom line. If we can't figure out a way to finance it the way we proposed, we won't proceed. The question is about what would the government still be liable for? We're not going to structure it that they would be. There are insurance policies that are available, despite what was said that they aren't. Boston never employed them because they never went with the bid. Chicago actually did have bids on insurance, but didn't proceed because they didn't get the overall bid. And LA right now is using insurance into their guarantee structure.
And just one final point, the budget will be in the final report.
Okay, Chris?
Okay, there's no such thing as cost overrun insurance. Let's be very clear on that. If there were, when I was renovating my kitchen, I would have bought it. If you go in with a contractor and you say, I want linoleum table, or an insurer, and you say, I want linoleum counters in your kitchen, and you get insurance for cost overruns, and then you decide, actually, I want granite countertops, there is no insurer that is going to provide that for you. Let's talk specifically about your question about where people can be on the hook and who can stand to benefit. So one of the things that Denver would have to build is an Olympic Village. And Vancouver and London both built Olympic Villages. They penciled out all their budgets with very smart people. These are not dummies in London who are coming up with budgets on this. They penciled it out in a economic upswing in 2004, 2005, in that time frame. And everything was going to be great, and then 2008 happened. And in both of those cities, London and Vancouver, the developer that had promised they were going to build the Olympic Village walked away, leaving the host city taxpayers to make up the difference and actually build the Olympic Village. In Vancouver, it cost them about $100 million when all was said and done. In London, it was a couple $100 million. London then later sold the Olympic Villages in 2012 to the Qatari royal family, who then flipped them 3 or 4 years later once the market was better and made multiple billions of profit on that. So if you're building an Olympic Village, you are going to be on the hook for those cost overruns, and if you pencil out your budget plans in an upswinging economy with rising home prices, and then we have a downturn, as we did in 2008, you are going to be paying the bill.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. We have still a lot of written questions, but we're going to have those, we're going to submit those to the panel, have their responses, and they will be on the INC website. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Hey, my name is Jude Ayala. Can you hear me okay? This is for the whole committee. I want to know if you can do Let's Make a Deal. Here is my deal. You have, this committee has the ear of the governor. We do not. We had asked for a study of a reroute and a parkway around I-70 instead of this expansion. Would you two sides be willing to do these 3 things before a bid could be submitted? To work on a commitment to a formal independent study of a parkway replacement of I-70 going through Denver and a reroute to I-270 and 76. Number 2, a guarantee that no one would be displaced either now, in the present, or in the future because of Olympic housing, and that all soft costs, things like security, would be not covered by the taxpayers in any kind of form, and that includes diverting any city or state services, because those are my 3 big concerns about doing the Olympics. Can you mitigate this?
So for the sake of time, I want to ask one person from each side to respond.
All right, I'll try to be quick. First of all, I reached across the aisle to both the governor and to Kyle for exactly that reason, is to understand what the concerns are. If we're going to be transparent and pure about the process, it's about one community moving forward with one idea of what we're wanting to do. I'm happy to talk about any issues. I also want to be realistic, though, about who we are and what we are. We're one voice, one part of the city. I'm happy to sit down and have the discussion, but if you think the exploratory committee can either get all these things already that are happening in our community or stop things that are happening, we don't have that kind of power. We have the power to convene and sit down and have discussion, and I have already offered that to both the governor and to Kyle.
Kyle, you want to respond?
So, yeah, I think what you're hearing is kind of the plausible deniability. I mean, you're going to continue to hear that throughout the process. The political, those running the political process will be able to divert blame to the Olympics and those interests, and those running the Olympics will be able to not have to answer for any of the social outcomes. So I think this is an early preview based on the composition of that committee and the tone that you're hearing, that they're really not accountable for these social outcomes, and this is the very early stage of this process. And you know, I think everything you're hearing from Chris on the history of the Olympics is indicative of that, and I just don't see that this group running it, as passionate as they are going to produce a different outcome. It's, you know, I've made this analogy. It's like the nightmare girlfriend or boyfriend that leaves a path of destruction everywhere they go. But this time it's going to be different. I'm just not seeing it.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
I'm Tom McWilliams. I'm a Denver, Colorado native. This question is for Governor Lamm. What was the key factors that led to the defeat of the 1976 bid?
You know, the key factor was honest newspapers. No matter what we said, or the other side said, you know, people get lost in these competing, you can see it here. There's valid points here, valid points over there. But we really had a crusading newspaper man here called Mike Howard, and he really was in pursuit of the truth. And so when I went in to talk to the head of the Denver Post about this, I was almost accused of being a traitor to Colorado. They wouldn't touch any negative news on the Olympics. The Rocky Mountain News ran a whole series about what the claims were and what the reality was, and I think if anybody deserved the major credit for that defeat, it was the Rocky Mountain News, an honest newspaper.
So just to add to that, so one of my colleagues with No Boston Olympics and I, we wrote a book on this subject, and we actually dedicated it to the media in Massachusetts, because it was only through the media that we were able to get our message out. Boston 2024, as you heard, raised and spent $15 million on the bid process. Our organization spent less than $10,000. We were outspent 1,500 to 1. Their average contribution size was $50,000 average contribution. Our average contribution was under $100. Only reason we won is because we turned it from, hey, it's this exploratory committee and we're just interested in the future, to a real debate and dialogue about what is best for our city's future. And I encourage you as citizens to do exactly the same thing. When Olympic bids are exposed to that attention, they do not do well.
And Rob, it seemed like you agreed with Governor Lamb's point. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think he said it very well.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I first want to thank all the panelists for being here. This has been great. I think this is a part of the democracy, us being able to see both sides. I also will say that I was a part of the community input committee for sharing the gold. I am not rich, I'm not a lobbyist or anything like that. I grew up on the north side of Denver, and I've also been a very, I think, a thorn in the side a little bit. I've been talking about some of my concerns and pushing some issues from within the process, and so I think that I would love to challenge. First, I want to challenge this side. Why are you putting up a straw man and saying that the Olympic Committee, a committee that's supposed to be creating something for the Olympics, should be challenging things that the City Council and the state of Colorado should be focusing on? And is that really fair to the process? And on this side, one thing that I'm going to continue to advocate for is I really see this process, the Olympics, as a potential stimulus package. It will bring tourism, and it will bring a lot of potential contracts. And one thing I would love to see is to mitigate gentrification, we need black businesses and brown businesses to be able to be at the table and to get a significant portion of the contracts so that they can feed their families and get money in that part of the community so that we can continue to thrive and stay here. So what is your commitment to that, and are you willing to start putting more specifics?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for your time. If you guys don't know, he and others spent hours of their time as volunteers to come down and help us work through this process. As you know, that was brought up on Thursday night, and it came to the discussion. And actually, the Sharing the Gold Committee put it up on the board, and I thought it was very important. And I stepped forward and grabbed the mic and said, not only should that be a goal, that needs to be a value. The value of inclusivity needs to be part of what we say and build it in and bake it into what we're doing. And if we can't do that, I said that at my opening comments today too. If we can't be inclusive and transparent, which I think is different than the way other cities have looked at this, then shame on us as a community because we're not taking advantage of an opportunity in front of us.
So your question was about why the skeptics of an Olympics are asking the IOC to be responsible for solving these problems. I think it's actually very much the opposite. What you're hearing from the boosters is that the IOC's spirit of Olympism and coming together and all of that is what's going to make Denver better off. But if you actually look at the members of the IOC, it is not a pretty picture. It's Princess Nora of Liechtenstein, the Duke of Luxembourg, the Sheikh of Kuwait, the Sheikh of Oman. And when you look at what they ask the Olympic cities to do, it's not just things like the taxpayer guarantee, it's also things like literally writing in the host city contract that they have a welcoming reception when they arrive at the airport with special dignitaries, that they have special entrances and exits to the airport, and that when they arrive at the hotel, the staff at the hotel will welcome them with a smile. That is literally written into the host city contract. So it's kind of crazy stuff. They also ask for a $900 per day per diem for the honor of being in your city. And it's the operating committee that has typically and historically paid for that. So it's not the skeptics that are asking the IOC to fix this, it's the boosters that are doing that. We would say very much the opposite, which is if there are challenges that Denver has, if it's about housing or transportation or healthcare, it's up to the people of Colorado to fix that, not Princess Nora of Liechtenstein or the Sheikh of Kuwait. You want to fix things for your day-to-day citizens, focus on that. Don't focus on a 3-week party in the year 2030 where they fly in for 2.5 weeks and they leave town.
Okay, next question.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. My name is Britta Horn, and I'm from McCoy. And McCoy is halfway between Steamboat and Vail, you guys all know. I'm also the county treasurer up in Steamboat Springs, and I'm very fortunate to be the fire chief, the volunteer fire chief for my community for the last 10 years. So my questions are, well, thank you. And I'm also running for state treasurer, so I have a card if you'd all like a card. Okay, all right, so the question is about what you were talking about earlier about Steamboat and Vail and obviously Aspen and a few other communities. Tell me about the impacts to our communities, these small resort communities. You know, we're talking about financial impacts, we're talking about transportation. I came over 2 passes this morning, about 4 or 5 inches of snow, and from Vail Pass all the way to Idaho Springs, it was a parking lot. Everybody just trying to get there. And actually, as an emergency responder, we worry about those kind of impacts too. Could you share both sides?
Sure. Let me comment first. I've had the opportunity to make presentations in a couple of the towns. In fact, I'm going to be in Steamboat, I think we're in a week, to make a presentation. Let me just say that there was a very interesting comment made when we were in Vail. And as you may know, in the case of Vail, they've held the World Alpine Championships 3 times. They've got the snowboard open now. And the comment was made by someone in the community, right in their community, saying, we have handled these kinds of events before on a championship level. We know how to do it, and they're not going to shut our community down. It's not going to be overly congested, et cetera. So I think all of these communities we're talking to in the mountains have a long history of putting on events. We don't have to cut any new runs. We don't have to cut any trees down, an issue that was in the 70s. But let me just say on traffic, we've talked to CDOT, we've talked to them about the arterials we'd use, and they are convinced that even if we don't have any improvements, that we can handle the 2-week requirements that would be posed to us by the Olympics.
And before the other side answers, I want to just ask the panel, is it okay if we go a little bit over to just get the last 4 people in line's questions in? Okay, great. So we'll have just at the end there, so go ahead.
So it's been a while since I've driven I-70. I have driven it before, and it is a beautiful trip. Is it 2 lanes each side through the mountains, through the passes? Every once in a while, yeah. So the IOC is going to require that one of those 2 lanes be dedicated to them during the Olympics. So all that traffic that you saw, if that happens, it's all forced to 1 lane instead of 2 lanes. I mean, that is the reality. They've required it at every Olympics since 1996. When they had it in Atlanta, they got stuck in traffic. Princess Nora got very frustrated by sitting in traffic. And so the next time they had a host city bid, they said, we have to have our own special lanes so that Princess Nora doesn't have to sit in traffic with all the plebeians. So that's what will happen for those 3 weeks.
Okay, looks like there's a quick response to that.
One other thing to remember, if the Alpine events are in the I-70 corridor, we happen to have something called Eagle Airport, which can handle 757s. In our experience, when we've been to other winter games, many of the people who come go up to where the alpine and snowboarding events are and stay there and house there. And so you can't underestimate the impact that some of these other regional airports will have dispersing that crowd, not just here in Denver, but already up near where the venues will be.
So Steve, does that mean that even though there's going to be the ability of course, of airplane travel, that will not shut down our highway?
No. Well, Eagle Airport is like 20 minutes from Vail and Beaver Creek, it's 30 minutes, so the traffic would be coming from another direction. And by the way, most of all these plans call for public-type transit in buses so that you take people out of their cars, and who knows by 2030 what kind of a car we're going to be driving in.
Okay.
Yeah, not just what I was going to say is Vancouver had a 2-lane highway for their games. They created a temporary lane going up in the morning and coming down at night, so they made a 2-lane highway work. Yes, there are Olympic lanes, but you can deal, we have shoulders and you can deal with cones and different things. That's what they did. I know it's not ideal. It's a 2-week event. It's not an everyday event. We need, you have to come up with creative solutions to deal with that. It doesn't necessarily have to take one of your lanes. It just has to be a way for us to get athletes and officials and other people to their events on time. And that's an issue. And the other thing I just want to say, every event we ever bring to this town has requirements around it. We just had the Colorado outdoor event, which I think a lot of people, retailer event, which a lot of people think is important. They required the hotels to have their staff wear jeans. It happens with events that we have all the time, and it's about being a welcoming host. It's not about royalty.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Tracy Winchester. I'm a member of INC through the Five Points Business District. And more importantly, I'm also from Massachusetts. Right. And I was around in the 70s. I don't think you were born yet, right, Chris? Yeah, okay. But anyways, I wanted to make sure that you all knew that I asked to be on the exploratory committee because I wanted to make sure that we did have accurate and adequate and more importantly, over-representation, if possible, for people of color, people from the Latino and people from the African American community as we deal with housing, as we deal with gentrification. And I was accepted immediately. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm here as an example because I was told by my people in Massachusetts that they said they did not have representation. They did not discuss it the way that we're discussing it here in this city. And I'm proud to be in Denver. Been here for 33 years, a little bit longer than some of the people here. But I'm just grateful for this opportunity that I'm proud to be on this, and I'm more proud to be an American and proud to be able to host the Olympics if we have that opportunity.
Thank you, Tracy. And I appreciate Tracy pointing out, I know that she's very active in our community. I think part of the question is, what about those people who aren't as well connected, who don't know that they need to be putting in their names for committees like this? So the outreach, I think, is critical. Go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank the Exploratory Committee for putting together the citizens group. It is the most diverse group that I have ever seen, and I have been involved in even in the DNC and other conventions. And I want to say that everything that has been said here, no, this is not a question. This is a statement, and I hope people can respect that. Everything that has been said here has been brought up at those meetings. I can guarantee you that there has been great representation. The process is not done because there are other committees who have to have their input. But when you say things like people, one of the reasons why I insert myself on some of these events is because I do represent the low-income disabled, the aging or age community. And one of the things that I do want to say, when I brought this up to the veterans, disabled veterans, they were so excited because they go to clubs up into the mountains, they ski, they snowboard. And I go up there myself, I won't ski or snowboard, I just like going up there. And people ask me, as a person who uses a wheelchair, how do you do this? There are ways of getting it done. So I want to thank you for putting together that committee. You know, we did respect everybody's opinion, whether they agreed with us or not. There are some, I would say the majority of the people respected each other's opinion. But you did have people representing a very diverse group of community people. So
Okay.
I want to thank you for that.
Thank you for your input. Next question.
Hi, my name is Tara Dunn, and I'm not a native. I grew up in Lakewood, Colorado. I've lived in Denver for 25 years and have never lived anywhere else other than when I was born on a Navy base. But my question for, I guess let's start with the exploratory side, and then I'd like to get a response, is what efforts have been made to include future and developing Colorado leaders who would be involved in potentially planning, overseeing, and maybe even competing in the games?
You're talking about the next generation?
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously we're trying to represent all groups. And so millennials, even though I know they don't like to be called millennials, but the young generation in our community is equally as important and has equal a voice to others. And so we've been trying to reach out, and we've worked with City Build Group. We've worked with a number of other TED Talk groups about getting their people engaged, reaching across the chamber leadership programs and the civic organizations that have leadership programs. And then it's part of the inclusion. We've asked our STGA people to help us reach out into the communities of color.
STGA?
The Sharing the Gold group, sorry, thank you, that Vivian just so well talked about, to help us reach out into all the communities so that we can include everybody of every age group, and including the young.
Okay. Kyle?
So, probably speak for me and not necessarily everyone, but on the panel, but I think part of the frustration is that all this effort, all this organizing, all this initiative, people say the mayor isn't visionary. The vision is around this mega sporting event. And I just wonder, we have in such a unique time in our history with tax revenues are off the charts. We have this incredible bond rating. All these efforts could be put towards growing the city in an inclusive way where everybody could, all the minority working class residents could continue to be a part of it long term. We could start to reduce car dependency. There's so much opportunity for big initiatives, and this just sucks the life out of everything. And I think we're all seeing just this incredible opportunity to grow the city in these unique ways and this unique chapter in our history, and to spend it on an event with this much baggage and negative history is just very unfortunate.
I guess I just didn't hear you answer the question.
Yes, I'd like to engage with those people in a way that's addressing the big picture social priorities for Denver and the region, rather than this as a pretense for this major sporting event, again, with all this negative history. So great opportunities to engage with this younger generation of leadership. This doesn't seem like the best use of those resources either.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so as we prepare for our last question, I'd like you all to just think about a 1-minute quick closing comment. So go ahead.
Hi, so my name's Taylor Rockhold, and I live in Denver. And just for transparency, I was also on the Sharing the Gold Advisory Committee, and you can call me a millennial. I'm proud to be one. So my question is for Governor Lamm and then the Exploratory Committee, as well as with a response. Through no fault of my own, I was not around in the 70s. So my concerns are, what does Denver look like today? And even more importantly and more excitingly, what is Denver going to look like in 13 years? So I know a major part of that vote was a $5 million bond, but there's also other outlying issues as to why Denver voted no in the 70s, which are security, growth, which luckily we dodged that bullet, infrastructure and transportation. Can you speak specifically as to why you think our radically and changing city is in the same position today to say no for those exact reasons? And then the Exploratory Committee, can you guys maybe answer kind of how you've approached those issues and how you're moving forward with them?
I would only quote history. I mean, it seems to me that the history of the Olympics since 1972 have proved out what we were saying. How many places have not made bids? How many are backed away from making bids? How many have withdrawn their bids? how many cost overruns there's been. I think one impact, however, of the vote in 1972 was it really was a wake-up call to 1980 was because that the International Olympic Committee was hit on the side of the head by Denver in 1972.
Sure, so I'll talk quickly about what happened in 1984, the 1984 games. So it was after the Montreal 76 games, which were 10 times over budget, and I'm going to respect the governor on this one. So the mayor of Montreal said that it was impossible to have a budget overrun. In fact, they had a 10 times budget overrun. So when it came time to bid for the 1984 Olympics, there were only 2 cities that wanted to bid. One was Los Angeles, the other was Tehran, Iran. Tehran dropped out of the bidding because of the Iranian Revolution, leaving Los Angeles as the only bidder. And when you show up to an auction and you're the only bidder, you get a really good deal. So when Rob talks about Los Angeles dared to dream and they were bold and they did the games their way, it was because they had all of the leverage in the conversation. You are not going to have that with Denver. There will be some autocratic country that will jump in and will make all sorts of promises to the IOC. You will be entering, if you continue with this process, the world's most expensive auction. That's what the exploratory committee wants you to do. That's the path that they're leading you down. And I think you'd be better off saying, we have more important priorities here in Colorado than the IOC's process.
Rob, Jerome, do you want to respond to that?
And thank you for the question. I would tell you this, we have changed since the 70s, and we've evolved to where we are right now. When you think how we've grown from Stapleton to DIA, there was no event that asked us to do that. We did that as a community to make us better. Fast tracks, we brought that on because we had to address mobility in a broader way. Thinking about climate change, we talk about this, but Colorado needs to stand up. We're one of the leading states as it relates to climate change action and where we're going. We've got plans in place where if things work the way we're trying to go, the state will be 55% renewable energy and 60% carbon reductions by 2005 levels. I don't hear the other side talking about some of the things we're doing even outside of the Olympics to move this state forward. We address our concerns as a community one-on-one. We don't need an activity or an event to address our concerns.
Okay. So we want to now do a rapid round of final comments. Rob, I'm also going to give you 1 minute and 30 seconds because I got a question from INC about if you all, since you talked about community engagement, if you will commit to having a member of the INC as part of that community engagement process, because thus far they have not been allowed to be a part of it. So we can start if we just go down the line. Is that okay? All right. Kyle, do you want to start? Final 1 minute closing.
So I think it's important to talk about these issues and some facts and some numbers that up to this point, and appreciate Chris's involvement. We haven't had that professional expertise to be able to really separate out fact from fiction. So I think that's helpful. The other broader question is whether we really do have the infrastructure to support Amazon, to support the Olympics. Car dependency in Denver it's off the charts. So we've made these key investments in commuter rail, but that hasn't necessarily translated into providing an alternate for people to have to drive everywhere. And then the same thing for affordable housing. We've accumulated this massive tab. It's likely to, the day the Olympics are announced, are likely to further light a fire into the real estate market, which is great for me. And, we have a hotel project too, but whether the community is in a position to account for that is really the question, and whether those infrastructure investments have really translated into a situation where we can afford the Olympics.
I just want to start with a thank you for inviting a Bostonian to come and share their experience. And so thank you to the INC for having me out. My sense is, from what I hear and see about Denver and what I've experienced just since being here on this trip, is that this is a city and a state that has an incredibly bright future. And you have your challenges, you have challenges on housing and transportation and growth and other things. but that this is really a great place to live and a place that has a bright future. And we in Boston felt the same way about our city. And what we decided as a democracy is that the IOC process and the IOC auction was not right for our future. We did not want to spend billions of dollars on a 3-week event to provide the IOC with a taxpayer guarantee that was going to be an enormous drain of resources away from our priorities and a distraction from those priorities. And so I really encourage you and thank you for being part of this conversation. It's incredibly important to look at this as a real public policy debate that has pros and cons that need to be compared to each other. And I think you will agree as a whole, as every democracy has in recent memory on the Olympic process, that this is not the right deal for Coloradans.
How does democracy make up its mind? It makes up its mind by a vote. And it seems to me that's ever more important in this. We don't want to tear the community apart. There is a catharsis to a vote. There is a coming together with a vote. A chance to go to the legislature to put this on the ballot in 2018. Let's vote.
And as a community, we should be united. And the first step in being united is understanding all of the facts. And really what this group has really always tried to present to you is just that, the facts. And I'd start off by right off the bat saying, we're not elite. I'm not elite. I'll be honest, when I hear Boston coming here, I think of Tom Brady. I'm wearing Bronco colors. I'm not the Patriots. I like Boston as a community, but I'm here about Denver, Colorado. That's my home state. I love it here. We'll always be here. And we'll only do the things that make this community good. I'm not in here for any individual gain here. I'm here to improve our community. And if it doesn't work for us, then I understand that. But we have to go through the facts and present that to you and then make a decision as a community. Should we or should we not?
I would just say 3 things. I would say this to Chris. This is not Boston. This is not Massachusetts, and we're proud many times that we aren't, because I think we do things differently and we think things differently. Number 2, we have a program to do this, or a plan to do this, without government subsidies or guarantees, and while we've been challenged to say that's absolutely impossible, we don't think so, but if we can't see our way through on that plan, we won't proceed. And the last thing I would say, we've heard a lot of claims about how bad Olympics have been. I think the governor even said the other day on television, every single Olympics has been an economic disaster. I would ask him to call Governor Romney, who ran Salt Lake on a very successful Olympics, in fact created a legacy of 90 million, and if it's so bad, why are they bidding again? I think it's a signal.
So first, let me address your question. So your question was, how come we have not allowed INC to be part of the civic and community engagement?
I'm sorry, on the exploratory committee.
Well, I didn't appoint this exploratory committee. It was given to me by the mayor. So what I've already said is well, you can
okay.
You can say what you want, but what I did then after that was say, would you let me talk, please? I think I've been patient answering everybody's question.
No, we appreciate that, Rob. So I just wanted to clarify. So they should ask the mayor to be on the exploratory committee?
Sure, they can. So let me just say, but all I'm saying is the mayor appointed the exploratory committee. I was asked if I would chair it. I've already said this. I told him I would do that. I'm assuming this is not part of my clothes. I told him that I would do that as a commitment as long as we had a transparent, inclusive process. After that, we set up the subcommittees to include as many voices in it, and the criteria that's actually set, this criteria for each committee was set by those subcommittees, and which the groups are a part of, and all of that's going to factor in ultimately to the decision of the exploratory committee, and they're not going to move forward unless all of those committees are in support of us moving forward, and we've included INC in a part of that process.
Okay, so this won't be on that. Right, I hear you. So this won't be part of your closing. Okay. So just one last quick question on that note. Can you commit to taking that back to the mayor
the INC's request that they have a representative on the exploratory committee.
Sure, I'd be happy to go back and have that discussion.
Thank you.
And be happy to have that discussion with the mayor's office.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So just in my wrap up, I would say we've been referred to as boosters. I said it at the beginning. Our job as an exploratory committee is to ask ourselves the tough questions. There are people on the exploratory committee who are against the bid. There are people who are for it, or every opinion in between. We have not made a decision on what we're going to do. We're trying to ask ourselves not only can we host the games, but can we host them in a new way? This is a very important question for all of us in our community. And the only way we can get the answer right is if we come together as a community and do it together. And if there's anything that I think we've tried to demonstrate in this process is reaching out, whether it's to city council, whether it's to the opponents, whether it's to other communities so that people can have a voice. We've tried to set up that process, and what we're going to try to do is represent as much of that feedback as we can in our final report.
Thank you. So in closing, I just want to commend, first of all, the INC for even holding this forum. I think that we are a stronger community when we're able to ask these critical questions. So thank you for all of the effort and time that went into organizing this INC. And lastly, I just want to thank the panelists. I think that, and Kyle said it earlier, and I've heard it echoed from Rob and through the rest of them, we must have a robust conversation around issues that are controversial or we have different viewpoints. It's the only way that we get at, as what Governor Lamm said, seeking the truth and finding those answers. So I want to thank the panelists for engaging in that, being open to hearing each other. I thought they did a fabulous job, so let's give them thanks.
And real quick, how about a hand for Lisa for being a great moderator today?
On behalf of the INC, I want to thank everyone here again. I want to thank the panelists, all of you. You did an excellent job. And this is how we go towards transparency. Thank you again. I want to thank the community leaders and the neighborhood activists that came here. We have people from the city. We have a few council members here. I want to thank them for coming. I want to thank the news and the reporters that came here. We do better when we work together. Thank you. And just remember, after this, we have some sandwiches out there. After this is going to be the Park Hill Course Initiative Forum, so please stick around. This is very important. Thank you, and thank you again.